this mom says that her daughter had a friend named Sophia and that she would talk about her all the time. What they did at recess, the fight that they had, how they got happy again. So there was a day where they were having a parent-teacher meeting, so she took advantage of that and asked the teacher about her daughter's friend Sophia. Her intention was to get Sophia's parents' information so that they can plan like a play date outside of school. Teacher ends up looking through the classroom's name, and then she looked through the entire grade, and she said that there was no girl named Sophia. She thought that maybe her daughter was confused and maybe Sophia was like her friend from another school. She thought maybe she understood wrong, but she explains how the details were very consistent. So when she ends up going home, she tells her daughter, hey, you should invite Sophia over to the house so that you can play with her. But her daughter's like, no, she can't come over. Her mom won't let her go anywhere. So she ends up asking the daughter for Sophia's mom's phone number, but she says that she doesn't have their phone number. So she ends up asking her, what class is Sophia in? Is she in your school? And she said that her daughter completely changed the conversation. Now, she didn't want to pressure her because she was like kind of scared of what she was going to find out about Sophia or things like that. But she made it a point to pay attention to her daughter and what she does without her daughter finding out. And that is where she discovers certain things. She would see that her daughter would actually save food from home for Sophia. She explains how fruit would disappear, food, even bread from the pantry. At first, she did think that her daughter was eating it, but there was one day where she saw her daughter walking out of the house and she had a bag full of food in her hand. She sees when her daughter leaves this bag of food on a fence and just walks away. That's when she started to go through her schoolwork or like notebooks, and she said that there were drawings of her daughter with another girl, and the girl on the drawing was named Sophia. She noticed that her daughter would draw Sophia like really skinny, skinnier than her, and she had the same clothes in every single one of those drawings. Almost like Sophia would use the same clothes every day. There was one night where she could hear her daughter talking really low in her bedroom, so she thought she was talking on the phone. When she peeked into her daughter's room, she noticed that her daughter didn't have a phone in her hand, but that she noticed that she was talking to somebody outside of the window, and that somebody from the other side of the window was responding to her. So the following morning, she decided to follow her daughter as she walked to school just to see what she was up to. She ends up following her for 2 blocks, and that is when she sees her daughter go to this empty lot that had this like tiny abandoned house in it, and she ends up seeing a girl coming out of that little house. The little girl was skinny and she had the same clothes that was drawn in the drawings at home. That little girl was really dirty, and she's like, this has to be Sophia. Obviously, when she sees that there's a little girl coming out and her daughter walking towards that little house, she too walked towards them. She says that Sophia got really scared and kind of retreated back. Her daughter got in between her and Sophia and was screaming at her mom to please leave Sophia alone. Don't tell anybody that she's there, because then they were going to separate her. She spoke to both of the girls really calmly, and they got, they felt a little bit safer, and they decided to tell the mom the story. So she finds out that Sophia is real. This is not a paranormal story, but I thought it was going to go there too. She explains that this little girl had been living in that house by herself for a long time. She was so saddened because she says that she had passed that house so many times without even thinking that there was a little girl in there. Sophia was 12 years old, and she has been staying in this abandoned lot for about 4 months because her mom abandoned her there. Apparently, the mom had told Sophia that she was going to come back when she found a house to live in, but the mom had not returned. The way that her daughter met Sophia was that she was walking to school, and Sophia ends up coming up to her asking if she had anything to eat, because at that point she was really hungry. And Sophia asked her daughter not to tell anybody that she was there, so obviously the daughter was trying to keep that secret. Ever since that day where she met her, her daughter had been taking her food, keeping that secret, and taking care of Sophia however she could. She did end up having to call the authorities because she didn't want to leave Sophia there. She took her to her house, and she's living somewhere that is feeding her. She's going to school, and she is okay now. She explains that her daughter does go visit her where she's at right now, and that the foster parents are really good. They're really nice, and they do take very good care of her. I know that this is not scary or paranormal, but I just thought it was a good story. I feel like it almost gave imaginary friend, but yeah, no, Sophia was real.
Inside the Las Vegas dam tunnels for years, and I have reason to believe that there is something that is neither human nor animal living inside the walls. This submission to Spooky Scary Storytime came from John, and John says that this is the type of story that if he heard, he would roll his eyes at. 2012 to 2019, he was working as a civil engineering technician and inspector in southern Nevada. He says most of his job was routine and boring. It involved flood control infrastructure around Las Vegas. So he worked on things related to stormwater tunnels and drainage pipes and culverts, and occasionally they got contracted on bigger jobs tied to the Colorado River system. which included the drainage systems tied to a major dam, which he doesn't want to name because he says he still knows guys that work there. And he says, just as a disclaimer, he has heard and knows of the stories of people that are living in the tunnels underneath Las Vegas. Everyone who lives there knows about this. It's documented. It's a real thing. He says there are flood channels underneath the strip where hundreds of people, maybe more, live permanently. Some never even come to the surface. He says he's even seen some of those makeshift camps himself during routine inspections. So people have makeshift beds down there. They have dragged shopping carts down through grates. And he says certain parts of those underground tunnels have violent stretches where you don't want to go. He knows that some people have been last reported seen before going missing, going into those tunnels. He said all of that is real, but he never bought into the wild tales about like rituals that people held down there or witchcraft covens using abandoned service tunnels. He never believed that there was some secret government infrastructure down there or there was any type of creature in these tunnels, because he said that all of that to him just sounded like urban legends that every city has if they have underground infrastructure. That's why he says what he encountered down there was unsettling, because this wasn't a homeless camp. It wasn't a guy squatting. This was something that knew the restricted and locked sections of these underground tunnels better than he and his team did, and it had been there seemingly a long time. Whatever it is collecting metal. So he says the drainage galleries of this particular dam is not like a wide open space like people probably imagine. Instead, it's narrow tunnels that have like pipes running along the ceiling and the walls, and tunnels are narrow with maintenance corridors and ladders and valves. And there's a few equipment rooms that are just like damp concrete. And some sections are well lit and modern. Others look frozen from like the 1960s with water dripping and nothing fancy. Most of the time when doing a routine inspection, he would walk miles and miles of seepage drainage galleries, and he was looking for water or dripping or anything out of place, really. The first time he comes across what he calls the collection piles, he didn't really think much of it. But tucked behind some pipes in an alcove were metal objects. So it was a bent spoon, it was a couple metal rings, old coins, heavy bolts, and a pocket watch with a cracked face. He really thought when he came across this small pile of metal objects that another coworker was just sort of collecting metal debris that he found down there, maybe stashing it in one place to throw it all away later. And so when he got back to his post, or when he got back with his coworkers, he mentioned it casually and everybody else just sort of shrugged. About a month later, he was walking down that same stretch and he noticed that that same pile, because he recognized the pocket watch with the cracked face, had moved to a different corner about 100 feet down the corridor. It happened again and again, and he found the same pile in different places. And every time he found it, the pile seemed to grow a little bit bigger. That same pocket watch was always in there, but there would be like small padlocks or a screwdriver. And then other inspectors that he worked with reported finding similar collections in other low traffic areas of the tunnels. It was always metal. It was never paper. It was never plastic. It was never food wrappers or anything nasty. And it became such a frequent finding down there that they actually started joking that they had a tunnel goblin, but nobody really cared to move it. Nobody really admitted to doing it, and nobody cared to investigate. So it just kind of became this background noise, and they all just sort of thought that somebody else on their crew was doing it. That all changed the day that John says he found footprints. In a dusty section near a drainage channel, the floor turned to mud, and he noticed a trail of tiny footprints. They had 5 toes, a distinct heel, and were perfectly human in shape, but only about 4 inches in length. The tracks continued for about 20 feet before stopping directly in front of an 8-inch drainage pipe in the wall. He says nothing bigger than a large rat should have been able to fit inside, and so he shined his flashlight in. There was nothing. He calls his supervisor. His supervisor comes down, takes a glance at him, and says, "Those are raccoon tracks." But John says he has seen raccoon tracks his entire life, and this was nothing like that. This wasn't even close. But months later, he was working alone, and he said he's used to the silence down there. You can hear water dripping from 100 feet away, but he turned a corner and he froze. He found the largest collection of metal yet. He found dozens of coins, several watches, a pocket knife, keys, and what appeared to be scrap metal that were all arranged in a perfect circle. And then he started to hear some scraping behind a bank of large pipes, like something was shifting its weight. So he called out thinking that there must be another coworker down there or something, but there was no answer. He moved closer with his flashlight raised, and he said between the wall and the pipes was a narrow 3-foot gap. And so he crouched down and he shined his flashlight into the gap, and for a fraction of a second, he saw something. This thing stood about 3 feet high. He said it was pale, it was small, it had thin arms and an oversized head. He had no idea what he was looking at, and he said when he shined his flashlight in its eyes reflected the light back. and then it moved. He said in a way that was incredibly fast and that reminded him of the way that an insect moves through a tight space. He heard some scraping and then silence. And so he shoved his shoulder and his arm through and he tried to see behind the pipes, but all he could see was a dead end. The space ended with another small drainage pipe. But this opening was no bigger than 5 inches in diameter and too small for this creature to have fit through. So he had no idea where this thing went and he continued searching for about 20 minutes, but turned up nothing. He said his heart was pounding, but he knew that whatever this thing was did not want to be seen by him. And so he walked back over to the circular pile of metal, and then he noticed that there was something painted on the wall. It said, "Don't leave tools." But it was faded and it was old, like it looked like it had been there forever, and he must have passed it a dozen times without even noticing it. Below the "Don't leave tools" warning was some other fragments of letters that he couldn't read. And so eventually he goes back to his post or back to his coworkers, and he's telling an older guy that he works with who has worked there since the 80s about it. And that guy told him that that has been written on the wall down there since before he even started. And so John's like, "Well, do you know anything about it? Like, why is that written on the wall down there in paint?" And the guy just shrugs at him and he's like, "I don't know. Stuff used to disappear down there." John says he left that job years ago and he still tries to tell himself that there is a logical explanation for what he saw. But from what he remembers, and he says he can still picture it clear as day, this was not human, this was not animal, this was unlike anything he has ever seen. He has tried to tell himself that it's just his mind playing tricks on him after too many hours in the dark underground. But the older he gets and the more he thinks on it, the less he believes his own rationalizations. Because whatever this was, it moved through locked, restricted sections that require keys and permits. It navigated pipes too small for any human or animal, and whatever it was collecting shiny things, and he says he thinks it may still be down there. So what do you all think is down there? Let John know your thoughts. He will be seeing the comments, and if you have a spooky or otherwise unbelievable story that you've been too afraid to share, please send it in. We would love to hear it, and we can change your name if it makes you more comfortable.
What would you do if you were driving home alone late at night and then saw yourself standing barefoot in the middle of the road ahead? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a woman in a late night drive and the version of her that got there first. A few years ago, I was driving home alone from my sister's house a little after midnight. It was one of those long, empty back roads where there are no streetlights, barely any houses, and if another car passes you, it feels like an entire event. I had taken that road 100 times before. It cut about 20 minutes off the drive, and I always told myself it wasn't creepy because I knew it too well. And that night it was freezing. It wasn't snowing, but it was just cold enough that the ditches looked silver, and the road kept flashing in my headlights like wet bone. I had music on low and the heat running, and I remember feeling tired in that dangerous way where your mind starts slipping for half a second at a time. And then I saw someone in the road, far ahead at first. Just a person-shaped figure standing dead center between the lines. I took my foot off the gas immediately, and my first thought was someone drunk, and my second thought was someone was hurt. Something bad enough that somebody ended up walking the road alone barefoot in the middle of the night. And then I got closer, and I realized it was me. Not vaguely like me. The same height and hair, the same coat I was wearing that night, barefoot in the road, smiling and holding something dark and wet in both hands. I slammed on the brakes so hard the car fishtailed a little. And by the time I stopped, she was maybe 30 feet in front of my headlights, still smiling and not moving. I remember staring so hard my vision almost stopped making sense. My brain kept trying to force it into something else. Another woman, a trick of the light, exhaustion, anything. And then the thing in the road tilted its head exactly the way I do when I'm trying to read something from far away. And that was what broke me. I locked the doors, not because a locked door was going to help if I was really looking at some version of myself standing in the road, just because it was the first thing my body knew how to do. I grabbed my phone and thought about calling somebody, but who was I supposed to call? Hi, I'm on County Road 8 and I'm looking at myself. While I was still trying to think, she lifted one hand and gave me the smallest little wave. The other hand was still holding that wet thing against her stomach. I flashed my brights at her, and she didn't blink or flinch. And in that brighter light, I finally saw what she was holding. It looked like hair. Long, dark, wet, gathered up in one fist like it had been cut off with whatever scalp or skin still clung to it. I made this awful sound out loud and threw the car in reverse, and she laughed. I couldn't hear it through the glass, but I saw it in the shape of her mouth. And then she started walking toward me. Not fast, but barefoot and calm, like she knew exactly how terrified I was and wanted to take her time with it. I reversed so hard I nearly went into the ditch. I straightened out and then whipped the car around and drove the other direction. I don't care how dramatic that sounds. I left. I drove 10 miles over the limit all the way back towards the highway, shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. I kept checking the rear view, expecting to see headlights or her running or something impossible in the back seat, but nothing. And by the time I got to a gas station near the interstate, I was crying hard enough that the cashier asked if I needed help. I told her I had almost hit someone, and that was the only version I could say out loud. I stayed there for nearly 40 minutes. I bought water that I didn't drink, texted my sister to tell her I was coming back because I didn't want to be alone. And then, like an idiot, I checked my maps to see whether there was another way around that road. And there was. Longer, but safer. So I took that. And for a while, I actually started convincing myself I had imagined the worst part of it. Maybe it was a woman in the road. Or maybe the thing wasn't hair at all. Maybe the face only looked like mine because I was tired and panicked and my headlights were throwing everything weird. And then I got a photo alert on my phone. I keep one of those cheap dash cams in my car because my dad made me buy it after I got rear-ended once, and I had forgotten about it completely. The clip had saved automatically when I slammed on my brakes. I should have deleted it, but instead I watched it. The footage starts with the road empty except for the figure ahead, and then the headlights hit her more fully. And there I am, standing in the road, again with the same coat and hair, and the exact same face. Only when the dash cam sharpens, my face is just slightly off. Eyes a little too dark, the smile a little too wide, like something saw me once and tried to put me back together from memory. And in the footage, right before I stop the car, the thing wearing my face lifts wet hair in one hand higher and mouths something. I slowed it down 3 times before I could make it out. It said, "You got here first." I didn't drive that road again for months. And then one afternoon, broad daylight, I made myself take it because I was sick of being scared of a stretch of pavement. And as I passed the same part where I'd seen her, I looked out into the ditch, and there was nothing there. No body or clothes or sign that anyone had stood in the road at all. Just one thing, a pile of long, dark hair lying in the dead winter grass. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
This is the only story that I've ever received where it actually made me stop recording halfway through and feel like I had to walk around my house and make sure that all the doors were locked. So, of course, I can't validate any of this, so this story is for entertainment purposes only, but I think you're going to enjoy this one. So, a follower sent me this story a few weeks ago, and he asked me to not use his real name, so we're going to call him Matt. Now, Matt said that this started happening in late 2020 after he, his wife, and their 6-year-old son moved into a rental house just outside of a small town in Ohio. Now, the house wasn't like this ancient, it wasn't this like creepy Victorian home with this deep, dark history. Nothing like that. It was built in the early 90s and looked completely normal. Now, for the first few weeks, everything was completely fine, right? Then one night, out of nowhere, during dinner, his son casually looked over at his parents and he asked a question. He looked at his mom and he said, "Why does the tall man stand in my doorway every single night?" And at first they assumed, he was talking about a dream. His mother laughed and asked him what tall man are you talking about? And the kid shrugged and he's just like, the one with the broken smile in my room. And that phrase immediately bothered the both of them, and it creeped them out, of course, not just because it sounded scary, but because it was such a strange thing for a 6-year-old to say, and like oddly descriptive. And they asked him, like, what do you mean by that? And the boy said that the man's mouth looked like it was hurt. And then he went right back to eating his dinner and didn't say anything. So over the next few weeks, he kept mentioning the man, always casually, never seemed scared of him. Sometimes he'd mention seeing him standing in the hallway, sometimes, in the backyard near the tree line. And once he pointed to an empty corner of the living room and he asked why the man wasn't standing there anymore. Now, Matt and his wife became concerned enough that they considered taking him to a therapist and even their local pastor that they became really close with. But then things got even weirder. One night around 2 a.m, Matt woke up because he heard his son talking through the baby monitor that they still used as like an intercom just in case. And he thought the kid was, maybe having a dream and talking to himself. But when he listened a little bit closer, he realized that his son was having a conversation. And there would be a long pause, and then his son would answer, and then another pause, and then another answer from his son. Like someone was talking back and forth with him. So Matt got out of bed and walked to his son's room, and as soon as he opened the door, the talking immediately stopped. And his son was sitting upright in his bed, staring toward the closet, wide awake, and Matt had asked him who he was talking to. And his son answered him immediately, and he just said, "The tall man." And Matt checked the room. There was, of course, nobody there. There was nothing around. And his son seemed completely calm, like he wasn't bothered by this whatsoever. And then he pointed toward the closet and he said something that made Matt realize that this wasn't some just imaginary friend or some type of child's imagination situation going on. His son easily said, "The man said you weren't supposed to hear him tonight." And Matt's like, "Dude, what the hell?" So the next morning, Matt asked his son to describe the man in detail, and the description that he gave stayed very consistent the entire time. He was tall, extremely thin, dark clothing, pale face, huge smile, and eyes that looked wet is exactly how his son described it. And that was the word that the kid kept using over and over, was his eyes are wet looking. Not shiny, not bright, wet. And that's very important, apparently. Now, a few days later, Matt's wife noticed something even more odd. Whenever their son drew pictures, there was a figure hidden somewhere in the image of the son's drawing. Whether they were at the park, at the store, at school, standing outside the house playing, always the same figure and always looking like it was watching them. So eventually they decided to do something a little bit unorthodox, and they had a friend of theirs who had an older son who was an artist, and he was in art school and he was a great artist, and he actually spent time over the summer interning at the local police department as a sketch artist. So the artist agreed to meet with the kid, and Matt said the sketch session lasted about an hour, and the artist would ask questions like, he would ask questions about the figure, and the boy would make very strong corrections, like, no, the face is thinner, no, the smile is bigger, no, the eyes are wrong, no, the forehead is too normal, like very, very descriptive. And it was over and over until finally the boy said, "That's him." And he said it very excitedly and proud. So the artist later admitted that the drawing absolutely disturbed him, which I'm going to show you. Now, not because it looked realistic, but because of how specific the child was. Children usually change details, but his son did not, and not even once. So the sketch was taken home, and Matt said that they left it on the kitchen counter that night. And around 3 a.m, his son started screaming, crying, screaming. It was the first time that he had done this, really. And they ran into his room, and the boy was pointing at his bedroom door, and he was hyperventilating, crying. He was unable to speak. And after several minutes, he finally got the words out, and he said the tall man had been standing there. But this time, he wasn't smiling. This time, the tall man was very angry. And when they asked why, the boy pointed towards the kitchen, at the picture pretty much, and he said, "Because you drew his face." Now, the next morning, Matt found something even more strange, if you could believe it or not. This story gets a little weirder. The sketch was no longer on the kitchen counter where they had left it. They searched the entire house, and eventually they found it in a closet laying face down on the floor. Now, nobody admitted to moving it. Nobody even remembered going into the closet. But a few days later, the sightings had eventually stopped, and they stopped completely. There was no more tall man being seen, no more conversations, no more drawings. There was nothing. Now being relieved, they moved on, right? Now months had passed, and then one evening, Matt was organizing old boxes in his basement, and he opened a storage tote that had been the belongings of the previous owners. And most of it was junk, like old magazines and receipts and old mail and everything like that, random papers, whatever. But at the very bottom was a photograph, and the picture appeared to show a family standing in front of the house sometime in the mid to late 90s. And the image, the quality was kind of crappy. It was, a little worn, you could tell, but there was something in the background, and standing near the tree line was a very tall, dark, thin figure, just looked like it was looking right at the camera, like photobombing the family. And Matt said that he initially assumed that it was maybe a trick of the light, until he noticed something else, that the face, even though it was a little blurry and even a little distorted, it appeared to have the same unnaturally wide smile, and the same smile that his son had described for months. And now, according to Matt, his son had never seen the photograph before, and the picture now stays locked inside of a safe inside of Matt's bedroom, and his son is older now and barely remembers any of it, but every once in a while, usually when they're driving past wooded areas at night, he'll stare out the window for a little too long, and he'll quietly ask a question that still terrifies Matt and his wife. And he'll say, do you ever think that he ever found his face again? And Matt said that he's never asked what that means or who he's talking about, because he's afraid that his son might actually know the answer and it may jog up some memories. So let me know what you guys think in the comments.
As somebody who lives in the Appalachian Mountains, I've gone camping here quite a few times, and I've never encountered something quite as horrifying as what's in tonight's story. So with that being said, grab your favorite tea and settle in, and let me tell you another scary Appalachia story, because of course, this is Tea After Midnight. This story comes from Anonymous. Hey Savannah, I've been really enjoying your Tea After Midnight stories lately, especially the ones about the Appalachian Mountains, because I live here too. Here is my scary Appalachian story if you would like to tell it on your page. I had just turned 18, and my mom and dad thought it would be a great idea for my family to go camping to celebrate mine and my younger brother's birthday. His birthday was just a few days after mine. My whole family really enjoys nature, so I was really excited to go. It was fall break this week, so my dad had planned for us to stay the entire week at a campground in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. We got to the spot and started setting up our area. It took us a while to set up the 2 tents and everything else that we had. One tent for my parents and younger siblings, and the other for my older brother, myself, and my younger brother. After we set everything up, we got ready to cook dinner and just hang out before bed. My older brother, myself, and my younger brother wanted to go on a walk before dinner, so we told our parents we would be back in a little while. My older brother was 19, I was 18, and my younger brother was 16 at the time, so my parents didn't have an issue with us going by ourselves. There was a 1-lane road leading around the entire campground, so we decided to follow this road and circle back around. It only takes about 30 to 45 minutes to walk the entire road to get back to where you started. As we were walking, we kept noticing that there were no cars or tents anywhere on the other campsites, which was very odd seeing that it was fall break, and every other time we had gone there on fall break, it was so packed you could barely find a spot to camp. Not really paying attention to it, we kept walking and just goofing off like we normally do. I noticed my older brother kept peering off into the woods around us, looking nervous and not saying much. I nudged him in the side with my elbow and said, "You're not scared, are you?" He looked at me and said, "No, I just have a feeling we're not alone." That instantly gave me chills because of all the horror stories we had heard growing up about the Appalachian Mountains. I looked over at my younger brother, and he didn't seem bothered by what my older brother said. We kept walking, and now I really started to pay attention to the woods and other campsites. It looked like a ghost town. No other cars or people, just silence. We were more than halfway done with the walk at this point, and it was starting to get really dark. None of us had brought a flashlight, so we started to pick up the pace to get back to our campsite. As we kept walking, we stopped dead in our tracks. Right in front of us on this road, there was what looked to be a person standing in the middle of the road. My older brother put his arm out in front of us to hold us back from walking any closer to them. He called out to the stranger and said, "Hey, do you have a campsite around here?" The person just stood there staring at us. They didn't answer him. My brother said, "We need to turn around and head back." But before we could turn around, the person started to sprint toward us in a very aggressive manner. My brother grabbed our hands and started bolting back towards the camp the way we came. I was trying to keep up with how fast he was running, but I kept hearing the person getting closer to us, and it was making me panic. I told my brother that the person was catching up, and my brother took mine and my younger brother's hand and dragged us into the woods to try to lose the person who was chasing us. As soon as we made it into the woods a little bit, I turned to look behind us to see if the person was following us, but they weren't. We stood behind a big tree for a few minutes to catch our breath. It was completely dark outside now, and the only light we had was coming from the moon. I had never been more terrified than I was in that moment. My older brother said, "I think they're gone, but we need to get back to camp now." We slowly walked back to the road and looked around us to see if we saw the person, but we didn't. We tried walking as quickly and as quietly as we possibly could down the road when we see headlights. My dad was pulling up to come find us because he was worried we had gotten lost. We all were so relieved to see him. We jumped in and told him how we saw this person standing in the road and that they just started to sprint at us and that the person looked very angry, so we had to bolt into the woods to lose them. Dad chalked it up to someone pulling a prank and that they were probably just trying to spook us. We had finally gotten back to camp and my brothers and I decided we were going to head to sleep. We didn't eat dinner or stay up and hang out. We just went right to bed because we were so freaked out. It took a while, but I finally fell asleep. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to tapping on my back. It was my younger brother. I roll over to see what's going on, and I didn't see my older brother in the tent. It was just me and my younger brother, so I asked him where our brother went, and he said that he had heard something, so we went outside the tent to check it out and go get Dad. I told my brother to stay put, and I stepped out of the tent and called for my brother, but he didn't answer. My mom was outside of her tent and said that Dad had went to go find my brother because he came into their tent and told them that he heard a noise. But when my dad got up to check, my brother was gone. I asked my mom how long he had been gone, and she said about 10 minutes. We sat at the picnic table for about 5 minutes when we heard a blood-curdling scream. It didn't sound like it was human. I froze and looked at my mom, and she looked as petrified as I did. This scream didn't sound right. It sounded like what I can only describe as the most evil-sounding scream I had ever heard. That's when I see my dad and brother come running out of the woods while my dad is yelling for us to grab our things and get in the truck. We grabbed what we needed and left everything else. My dad sped all the way out of that campground as my older brother was sitting in the back with this look of disbelief and terror on his face. I asked him what happened out there, and he kept repeating, "I don't want to talk about it," and "just drop it." The next day when we were back at our house, I went into his room to talk to him about it, and what he told me still makes me shiver. He said that he kept hearing something walking around our tents, and it kept making this awful groaning noise. After a few minutes it had stopped. He said he ran to Dad's tent to go get him so they could check it out, and as he was telling Dad to come help him to check, he heard something behind him running away. When he turned to look behind him, he could see the person we encountered earlier on the road. My brother said that he ran after him because he didn't think it was funny to be coming over there to our camp trying to mess with us. So we ran after them to try to find out why they were doing this. My brother said he followed them into the woods a good ways when he saw the person on their knees, hovering over what looked like a dead deer with its belly ripped open. My brother said this person was ripping the insides of the deer out from its carcass and eating it. And when he saw what they were doing, he gasped, and the person turned his head towards my brother. My brother said that he had yellow, glowing eyes, and was covered in blood, that's when the thing screamed. My dad showed up right as my brother saw the yellow eyes and grabbed my brother's hand, and they both ran back to camp. My dad told me later that day that he saw it too when he showed up to grab my brother, and that the person that was eating the deer definitely did have yellow eyes, and that it definitely wasn't human. I'm not sure what that thing was, but I'm so glad we all made it out of there safely. I am 42 now, and I have never been camping ever again after that. My brother and dad were never really the same after what they saw. I still have many questions about that camping trip. Why were there no other people at that campground? Who or what was the person or thing that was eating the dead deer? And why was it walking around our tents, groaning in the middle of the night? So I don't know about you, but this story definitely gave me goosebumps. I also would like to know what you guys encountered, because that is absolutely terrifying. Not only are they standing in the middle of the road, not answering your questions, but then to sprint towards you and you have to lose them in the woods, that's terrifying. But then to find out later that your brother heard the thing walking around the tent groaning in the middle of the night, it woke him up, so he goes to get your dad. Your dad comes out there, your brother's sprinting off into the woods, but when he shows up, he sees the same thing your brother did. Let's talk about that. So when your brother shows up and finds this person, it's hovering over a dead deer, and it is eating the insides out of the carcass of this dead deer. That is absolutely vile. So if anybody watching this video knows what they encountered, please let us know, because that is absolutely disgusting. I just want to say thank you so much for sending in your story. I am so sorry that you guys went through that, and I'm so happy that y'all are safe. That is absolutely horrifying. I couldn't imagine going through that, and I definitely won't be camping after I heard this story. But that does conclude this episode of Tea After Midnight. If you have any personal scary stories you want to share, I would love to read them. You can email me at the email on the screen or the email in the caption of this video. As always, you guys, thank you so much for being here. I love y'all so much. I hope you have the best night, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.
Did you know that there was a woman in Brazil by the name of Fernanda that happened to be walking down the street one day? She's just minding her business when this elderly fortune teller lady walks up to her and tells her that she only has a couple days to live, and then hands Fernanda a piece of candy, or a piece of chocolate candy, as a farewell gift, and walks away, leaving Fernanda standing there with this information. Fernanda, thinking that this old lady is probably going senile, she doesn't think anything of it, and since the piece of candy was sealed, she went ahead and ate it. Less than 24 hours later, Fernanda ends up being rushed to the hospital. She was vomiting, foaming at the mouth. She had a severe stomach pains. The doctors tried everything to save her, but unfortunately were not able to, and Fernanda passed away. For 2 months, no one knew what happened to her. They of course went ahead and ran toxicology reports, but in Brazil they took 2 months for them to finally come through. When they finally did, the results were sickening. Fernanda's body was full of these lethal doses of these agricultural pesticides. She had been intentionally poisoned. Now this is where the story gets really frustrating, since it took the lab 2 months to come back with the results. By the time they got the results and found her cause of death, there were very little leads on this mystery fortune teller woman that Fernanda encountered. And any sort of video evidence that they could have captured outside, since Fernanda did encounter this woman out on a busy road, that footage had already since been deleted. Apparently this was one of those recordings where they recorded daily, but at the end of the day they would just record over the tape, so it had been permanently deleted. So till this day, that elderly woman has never been identified, or the motives behind why she did what she did have never come to light. I honestly feel like it was some sort of inside job. Maybe this older lady was paid by somebody, but it definitely makes you think of that old tale where you're always told don't accept any sort of candy from strangers. But as adults, it seems like we let our guard down, especially when it comes from a defenseless old lady who hands you a piece of candy or a piece of chocolate that's already been pre-sealed, or that it's sealed. So stay safe out there. Be careful who you accept candy from, or food from in general. I tell you guys, don't accept food from anybody. And it's a scary thing. I don't know. Poor Fernanda, super healthy, young, beautiful. It's just gone. Just like that.
So this girl says that this happened to her a while back when she still hung out with her ex's family. It was almost like they were married because she became girlfriend and boyfriend with the guy, and then she moved in with him and his entire family. She did live with them for about 3 to 4 years, and their relationship did have their ups and downs just like any other relationship. She explains that on every Day of the Dead, this family had the habit of spending the night at the cemetery. And just a heads up, it is normal for some people in Mexico to stay the night at the cemetery, especially when their loved ones are all like in the same spot. They do stay there and they pray over them. They stay there and eat with them, just things of that sort. If you've seen the movie Coco, you know what I'm talking about. For this family, it was them celebrating their loved ones, and she said that she started to celebrate with them as well as the years went on, and she would go with them to the cemetery too. Now, it was the very first time that she had spent Day of the Dead with them at the cemetery where this happened to her. She explains how she got along really well with her brother-in-law because they were closer in age than she was to her boyfriend, and they also had very similar interests. So every time they go to a party or like a family gathering, they would spend their time together just talking about different things away from everybody else. Now, she mentions this because that's exactly what happened when they got that night to the cemetery. They get there and they both sit on chairs together, and everybody else sat around like another area. It started to get really cold, so the family started a fire and everybody went to go sit down around the fire, which was also surrounded by the family's tombs. So she's sitting around the fire talking to her brother-in-law, and that is when her boyfriend comes up to them and says, "Hey, it appears that we're not going to be the only ones staying the night at the cemetery." When her and her brother-in-law look back, they see that there's an old lady waving at them like a good distance away. They obviously waved back at the old lady, and then they started giggling because she just looked kind of silly, like far away and just waving at them out of nowhere. After this is when the brother-in-law thought it was the perfect time to start telling ghost stories and paranormal stories, and being that her boyfriend did not like that very much, he walked away to talk to his sister who was like across from them. But she stayed there because obviously she also loves scary stories and she wanted to hear what the brother-in-law had to say. So after a while, telling ghost stories, they both turned to see if they could see that old lady again, but they couldn't see her anymore, and they thought they had seen her walk toward the entrance again, but they weren't too sure. What they did see though were 3 ladies walking into the cemetery and going towards like farther away from them. They were also all in black, so they basically lost sight of them at a certain point. Not a long time had passed when they had lost sight of the 3 women, where they suddenly saw somebody running from that end of the cemetery towards them. And by the time the person got to where they were, they realized that it was actually the security guard, and he asked if he could stay with them just for a few moments, and obviously they agreed. When they saw him, they noticed that he was like pale, so the family offered him a drink, they offered him food, and he took it and sat down and calmed down for a little bit as well. She explained how her and her brother-in-law couldn't stop looking at him, like they knew something was up, even though everybody else started to ignore him after they gave him like the drink and food. They just couldn't stop looking at him because they knew something was wrong. She explains how her brother-in-law was not the type to stay with that curiosity, so he ended up calling that security guard and telling him to come sit next to them so that they can keep him company. By this point, her boyfriend and the boyfriend's sister also got very curious and decided to come and sit next to them as well because they wanted to know why the fuck he had just ran from that deep end of the cemetery. So at this point, it's her brother-in-law, sister-in-law, her boyfriend, and the security guard, and that is when she decides to ask the security guard, "What happened? Like, what's wrong? Are you okay?" The security guard very honestly says, "No, I'm not okay. I think something happened to me that people claim happened here, but I had never experienced it myself." So this is the security guard's story. He said that he was doing his rounds and that they had already told him that only 3 families were going to stay in that cemetery overnight. Even though 3 families were going to stay there overnight, they still told him to go around the cemetery because around this time, some people are prone to going into cemeteries and stealing bones, even people's jewelry or things like that. So obviously he still needed to do the rounds all around the cemetery and not just where the people were going to stay overnight. So at that moment, he was in a part of the cemetery where no one was going to stay the night. It was like one of the oldest parts, and that is when he sees 3 women back to back with each other walking in a single line. All 3 women were walking with their heads down, and they had black veils all over their faces as well. He was about to go up to them because he didn't have in his registry people that were going to stay the night there, and being that he saw 3 older women, he didn't think that they were any threat. So he was about to walk up to them to see what they were doing there or if he can help them with anything. Now, because they weren't such a threat to him, he was just walking at his pace towards them, being that he saw that they were walking too. But the more he walked towards them, the more he couldn't keep up with them or catch up to them. It got to the point where he started running towards them and he just still couldn't keep up with them, and that is where he saw them enter this mausoleum and they just completely disappear. When he finally gets to this mausoleum, he notices that the door, it's surrounded by a chain, and the chain is still full of dust, meaning like it was not open. There's no way that these ladies could have gotten in in there. He also knew that it had been a very long time that no one had gone to there to visit family members, and that is when he realized that something else was at play, and he just started running out of there and ran into the family that was staying overnight there. By the time he got to there, he just knew he couldn't keep running, so he needed to gain his strength just for a few moments and then continue running towards the entrance because he planned to get the F out of there. All four of them decided to walk the security guard to the entrance, and she explains how he was still pale. He still looked very scared even after they walked him like outside of that cemetery. By the way he looked, by the way he was acting, there was no way that he could have made up that story, or at least that's just her opinion. After they went back to sitting around the fire, they also were just like thinking like, I wonder if it was the same ladies that we had seen who were walking back there at the time that, you know, they saw the three ladies walking by all dressed in black. They also started thinking about that lady that was waving at them from far away, where they thought it looked kind of silly. They were like, was she real? Was she not real? Like, what is going on? I hate to say it, but I feel like if I was already staying the night at the cemetery, I might have gone back there with my friends and families just to check it out, just to see, you know. Maybe not, I don't know. Maybe I'm just saying this because I'm sick and I don't know any better right now. Nah, I would still go just because I'm nosy, just to see if the ladies are there or not, because I never saw them leave. If I don't see them there and I never saw them leave, then maybe the security guard was telling the truth. Anyway, what do you guys think? I made it to the end of the video with a voice still. Sound like shit, but still, I made it, yeah.
What would you do if you were staying alone in a hotel room and then you hear a woman crying outside of your door in the middle of the night, and when you don't open it, you realize that she doesn't need help? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a woman who says that one work trip ended with something waiting outside for her in the hotel hallway. I travel a lot for work, so I stay in hotels by myself all the time. This happened in one of those boring highway hotels where every hallway looks the same and everything smells faintly like bleach and old air conditioning. I had checked in late and I was exhausted. I showered and I locked the door and I put the chain on and got in bed. I was just starting to fall asleep when I heard a woman crying in the hallway. And at first it sounded far enough away that I thought she'd pass my room. And then it stopped right outside my door. I sat up immediately, and she wasn't screaming, just this quiet, shaky crying like she was trying to hold it in and couldn't. I got out of bed and went to the peephole. She was further down the hall at first, maybe 2 doors away, bent forward a little with hair hanging over her face, and I noticed she was barefoot, and that was the first thing that fell off. Bare feet on hotel carpet. And then she said really softly, "Please." I stayed quiet, and then she said, "Can you help me?" I should have called the front desk right then. Instead, I made the mistake of speaking through the door. I asked if she was okay, and then the crying stopped instantly. It didn't fade, it just stopped. The silence after that made my whole body go cold. And then she said, "You almost opened it." I backed away from the door and I didn't say anything. I told myself maybe she heard me move, or maybe she saw the light under the door. I was letting it get to me because I was tired and alone. And then she laughed. Quiet at first, and then while she was laughing, her voice started dropping lower. Not all at once, it just changed underneath the sound, like the crying voice had only been sitting over the real one. And then she said, "I know where you moved." I looked through the peephole again, and she was closer. I never heard any footsteps, and that's what I can't get over. 1 second she had been farther down the hall, and now she was standing right outside my room, still barefoot, and bent slightly forward. At first, I could only see part of her face because she was too close to the peephole. One eye and part of her mouth, and skin shiny around the lips. And then she slowly leaned back, and that was when I saw what was wrong with her. Her face looked almost human. That was the problem. It was close enough that my brain tried to make it normal for half a second. And then I started noticing the details. One eye sat a little lower than the other, and her skin looked too smooth across the cheeks and too tight around her mouth. Her lips were stretched like she had been learning smiling from watching people do it. And when she smiled wider, her cheeks didn't move with it. And then she said in that deeper voice, "You're behind the other door." I called the front desk, and my hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I told them there was a woman outside my room acting strange and I needed security or someone to come up. While I was still on the phone, I heard a soft tapping on the door. It wasn't pounding, just one fingernail tapping near the peephole. And then she said, "Let me look at you." I backed all the way towards the bathroom wall and stayed there. The tapping stopped, but then the doorknob moved. Slowly, like not rattling and not fighting the lock, just turning as far as it could, easing back and then turning again like she wanted me to hear her trying it. And a few seconds later, I heard the elevator open at the end of the hall and men's voices coming closer. A few seconds later, I heard the elevator open at the end of the hall and men's voices coming closer. Everything outside my door went quiet. Hotel security knocked first, and then somebody from the desk. I opened the door with the chain still on. The hallway was empty. There was nobody there. They checked both directions, they checked the stairwell, and even the ice machine area, but there was nothing. I kept telling them she had been right outside my room. The security guard asked if I maybe heard someone farther down the hall and got scared because I was tired. Then he leaned in toward my door and asked what the marks were. Around the peephole on the outside, there was greasy fingerprints. Long, grayish-looking smudges. And lower down near the handle, there was one wet mark dragged sideways like somebody had pressed their mouth there and then turned their head. I did not stay in that room. I made them move me immediately. Security walked me and my suitcase down to the elevator, and I remember finally starting to calm down a little because at that point I wasn't alone anymore. I kept telling myself whatever happened, at least I was leaving that hallway. The elevator doors opened and we stepped inside. I was facing forward, looking at the mirrored panel on the back wall while the security guard stood beside me. And in the mirror behind him, I saw her, standing in the hallway just outside the elevator, and barefoot, and still smiling. That same wrong face. One hand lifted slightly like she was about to wave. I spun around so fast I slammed into the rail, and the hallway behind us was empty. And then the elevator doors closed, and I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.